Hello, everyone. Welcome to the series Mud Talks, How Supporting Students' Social Emotional Learning Leads to Improved Academic Outcomes with Hanna Ma, class of 94, and her colleague, Dave Fendel. My name is Vanessa Chu, Assistant Director in the Office of Alumni and Parent Relations. We thank you for joining today. This talk is being recorded and will be distributed after the event. Please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat, and we'll try to get through as many questions as possible. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Hanna and Dave to introduce themselves. Hanna, Dave, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon and good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to our Mud Talks tonight, this afternoon. My name is Hanna Ma. I am class of 94 with engineering degree. And I am really excited to be joined by my colleague, Dave Fendel. And just want to say, we are both parents, and I know that we have a lot of parents joining us. So we just want to let you know that we're going to also speak from that perspective, as well as from the education side, and of course, as for students as well. So Dave, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Hanna. I'm Dave Fendel. I am the coordinator of social and emotional learning support here at the Contra Costa County Office of Education. And like Hanna said, I also am the parent and step parent of 4 wonderful kids, high school senior who will be off to college in about 7 months. I also have a high school junior, a high school freshman, and a 6th grader. So life is busy at my house.
Yes, and I should say that I have a college first year student as well as a high school junior. So welcome, everyone. So I'm just going to share my screen. All right, can everybody see? Okay. Dave, thumbs up?
Yeah, I got you.
All right, got it. Okay, so what we're going to do today is 4 things right here. We're going to provide a brief introduction to social emotional learning. We will explore how our emotions influence our learning. We're going to connect to science of learning and development, and we're also going to share resources for you. We have lots of resources to share with you. And we're also going to try to make our webinar, I know it's a little bit limiting, but we're going to try to make it interactive, because that's what we do. We try to really engage with our audience. So if you have your phone handy, we're going to give you some QR codes that you can go ahead and scan. So you would go to your phone and then go ahead and go to the camera app and then scan. We're also dropping in chat. So thanks, Vanessa, for doing that. If you are able to get right onto the chat, you'll see the direct link. So we would like to take a quick survey. So here's the survey question, real simple. The first question is, think back to your best class that you've ever had, or a job that you've ever had. So whatever best means to you, just think about it. From elementary through middle, through high school or college, the best class where you just felt really, really like good about being in that class, or it could be a job, okay? So you have 1, 2, or 3 choices. You can choose to enter 1 word, 2 words, up to 3 words to describe how you felt in that environment. So 1 word, 2 words, or 3 words. So we're just gonna give you a moment to go ahead and type that in and then hit enter. And what we're going to see is a word cloud with the results. So right before I'm about to show you the word cloud, I'm giving you a moment, a bit longer, for more people to join in, because I see it right now. I'm just going to show it to you soon. The word cloud shows us words that you have entered in. If we see a word that's kind of larger than others, that means that was more common. So, multiple people wrote that exact word. So just gonna kind of count down 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And I'm just going to kind of like do this thing where I show you the words. Okay, so can you see that? All right, so right in the middle, we see engaged, we see happy, we see empowered, We see energized. We see those words that are larger. Like I said, those were more common. So more people said those words. Oh, and it keeps changing as more people are entering. We see interested, understand, exploratory, comfortable, not knowing. Love that. Fascinated, seen, fun, energized, proud, powerful. Wow, these are great, strong, amazing, wonderful words. So this is how you felt in that environment. Hopefully you felt good writing that and remembering that. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and take that away. And I'm going to move us to the next question. Okay, I'm gonna move to the next slide and then move to the next question. So we have a next question. Now we're gonna flip it over to the other side. Now think of a class or a job that you've had where it was just the pits. It was terrible, terrible class for whatever reason, terrible job. How did you feel in that environment? So again, 1, 2, or 3 words that you can go ahead and describe how you felt in that environment where it was the worst class or the worst job. How did you feel about that? Okay, I see some words popping in. Gonna give you a little bit longer and I will start counting down and I'll show you the results. All right, so again, worst class, worst job. I'm imagining it might be kind of the antonym of the words that we saw, right? So let's go ahead and take a look. Oh, I'm gonna count down 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, so this is what we see. Bored. Bored is right in the middle. So a lot of you said bored, unhappy, alone. I see other words. There are lots and lots of different ones here. Hostile, wow. Waste of time, trapped, undervalued, micromanaged, discriminated. These are really strong words on the negative side. Unengaged, constrained, traumatized, stuck, overtime, yeah. Discounted, down, lost, invalidated, afraid, ignored. Thank you so much. These are very, very just, strong words. And I can't think of like a word that kind of makes you feel really down. And I'm sorry that that I made this the second question, but I just wanted to make a point, right? We have the best class, best job, and the worst class, worst job. I'm just going to tell you a quick story. So it's a tale of 2 classes, and that picture is me when I was in 4th grade, years and years ago. So I want to tell you a short little story of 2 classes. And the first class that I want to tell you about is a year before this picture was taken. And if I were to tell you about my 3rd grade class, I would say that was the worst class. My 3rd grade class was the worst class. And the words I would use to describe that, how I felt in that environment, I would say I felt alienated, I felt unwanted, and I felt stupid. Alienated, unwanted, and stupid because I was a newcomer to this country. I had no English knowledge. I had no knowledge of the culture. Everything was brand new. And I was placed in a classroom where the teacher just didn't know what to do with me. It was as if like she had no clue what to do. So pretty much that whole year, I just sat there. I was an observer in my own classroom. I had nothing except for a weekly assignment that she gave me, which I really had no idea how to do. So that made me feel even more stupid. So that whole year was the worst year of my life. Plus, there was a kid in that class that did like these terrible, terrible racist gestures at me. They made these gestures, racist gestures, and the teacher seemingly just ignored it. I'm sure the teacher knew, but she seemed to just ignore it. So I just felt really emotionally unsafe in that environment. So that just kind of added to how I hated being in that class. But I'm showing you this photo right here because there's another story. The second class, it was my 4th grade class. Same school, different teacher, different class. Her name is Miss Watson. Her name was Miss Watson. And in that class, I'm still me, but it was a completely different environment for me because Miss Watson made me feel loved. She made me feel connected, and she made me feel empowered. Again, I'm still like this child who doesn't know English, who doesn't know the ways of the American, culture, anything, but she really saw me for who I am. That's how I felt in my little 10-year-old body. She knew me. She made me feel smart. She told me things that I could understand, that I am smart. She communicated that to me. And in fact, she had me tested for a gifted program when I don't even know English. And I remember seeing all those shapes and I'm like, oh, that's easy. I know what comes next. And somehow I made it in the gifted program without being, fluent in English, because she saw me for something else, not the limitation, but something else. And also I remember I hit a grounder in softball that people didn't catch. And she said, I mean, that was the teacher who believed in me. And so in that classroom, I felt loved, connected, empowered. And you could see I am beaming in this photo because that night of the photo is when we were on a talent show. And she said that I had a good singing voice, so she had me perform in a quartet. So I was super excited, and that's when the photo was taken. And by the way, we're talking about how emotions are connected to learning. That year, I became fluent. At the end of 4th grade, fluent, just like that. So I just wanted to share that story with you. Dave.
Thanks, Hannah. I love it when you tell that story. So what you see on the screen here, many of us are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you have your psychological needs at the bottom of the pyramid, all the way up through self-actualization. What we did here is we put some words on the right-hand side to think about those needs in a school context. And what we know from Maslow is those basic needs on the bottom need to be met before those needs at the top can be actualized. And so here you have, secure in your basic needs for survival. Oh, go ahead, next slide, yeah. And so we've circled here, right? Do we expect in the school system, students to arrive and to be able to thrive in that top ring when the needs of the students at those first levels have not been met, right? And Hannah talked a lot about in her story about love and belonging and safety, right? And esteem. And we see those there in Maslow's hierarchy. And then that top one, self-actualization, is when she was able to become fluent, right? She was in that environment and that led her to be able to have those academic gains. Whereas in that first year, she didn't have those needs met and her brain just simply couldn't learn. Next slide. Here's another way to think about the skills necessary for students to succeed. And this is a building blocks framework. Even at a very early age, early elementary school, students are often expected to already have those skills that you see on the bottom row mastered by the time they enter school. And far too often, that is where skill gaps are missing. If you ask teachers how they want their students to be as students, what you're going to hear are those skills that you're seeing now on the top row. Things like academic tenacity, curiosity, and self-direction. But as you can see in this framework, those attributes are really much less likely to be present if students don't know how to self-regulate, if they don't have stress management skills, or they're not able to develop relationships with others. All of these skills are the skills present identified by social emotional learning. Next slide. We're going to pause for a second to watch this video.
And I'm going to start my talk with a picture of my children's jack-o'-lanterns.
And I'm going to start my talk with a picture of my children's jack-o'-lanterns from a few years ago. And the reason is that
for how children learn. Inside of each one of those little pumpkins is a fire burning, a fire that consumes oxygen and that shines out through that child's actions and through that child's beliefs and through that child's learning in the world. And you know, historically we've thought, and scientists even thought, that emotions interfere with clear-headed thinking, that in order to learn well, we needed to get our emotions out of our thought. We needed to take our self out of it. We needed to take our feelings out of it, and instead just focus in a kind of pure way on the cognitive skill that we're trying to develop. And what we're learning with our new neuroscientific research is that nothing could be further from the truth in the way that human brains actually learn. And this makes good sense evolutionarily, because the ordinary purpose of our brain is to keep us alive. It's to steer our actions and our thoughts and behaviors so that we remember the things that matter, so that we learn the things that we think are going to need in the future, and we don't attend to or spend a lot of time thinking about the stuff that we think doesn't matter or that we think is not important. To demonstrate what I mean, I have a little poem written by a kindergartner about her baby brother named Theodore. She calls him Teddy. And you can see a little picture of her up here with her little pink dress and crayon. And underneath, she's written out her poem. And it says, "Oh, Teddy, we love you more than the whole earth size. As the earth spins every day, we love you as much as usual, but sometimes even more, as you make us proud and happy that you're you." I have a simple question for you. Is that a poem about this little girl's love for her baby brother? Or is that a poem about her budding knowledge of planetary science? Our emotions and our relationships and our cultural experiences in the social world literally organize and shape the development of brain networks that allow us to learn. Over the course of the morning, you're going to hear from my colleagues about their work describing how children's identities, how children's emotional experiences in the learning environments they're exposed to are influencing what they're capable of doing. And I want you to take this information very seriously, because this isn't just sort of a recent fad about how people learn to make people happier or something like that. This is literally shaping and changing and recruiting brain networks for memory and emotion that will not be recruited any other way. It is literally neurobiologically impossible to think about things deeply or to remember things about which you've had no emotion. And I'm going to start.
All right, so she says it's literally neurobiologically impossible to remember or think deeply about things about which you've had no emotion. And then here's another quote from Mary Helen Imardino Yang and co-authors Antonio Damasio. "Emotional processes are structurally and functionally intertwined and often the same as the cognitive capacities required for learning." So that is kind of the point of our talk right now. And so we're going to go ahead and delve into it a little bit more. So we know that the brain, our brain, is malleable throughout our lifetime. I think we used to think that the brain kind of stopped developing early on, perhaps around age 6. But with technology advancement, especially with brain scans, it's allowed us to see the brain is changing over our lifetime. And it kind of takes care of that debate between nature and nurture. It's actually both, right? The interaction of our biology and environment determines who we become. So when we talk about the environment, it's one of the three: environment and also our experiences and relationships that define the context, and context matters. And the fact that the context matters and the brain is malleable, you can think of it as both an opportunity and a vulnerability depending on the context. So to kind of highlight one of the contexts, so I have here for you some data. And it's a little disheartening because this is data that is self-reported, and this is throughout the state of California. And we've taken data from a survey called California Healthy Kids Survey. Like I said, this is given in California to just about all of the public school students from elementary through high school. And the question was, during the past 12 months, did you ever feel so sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 weeks or more that you stopped doing some usual activities? So basically, did you experience this chronic sadness or hopelessness for 2 or more weeks? And look at this data. It was pretty high to begin with, 20-something%, 27, 28% to 30-something%. And as you can see 7th grade, 9th grade, and 11th graders are struggling more. But it really hiked up, jumped up 2020, 2021 during COVID. Really jumped up to 30s to the 40s, mid 40%. That's pretty high. And here's something else that's even more alarming for you. Same survey. Then the question is, during the past 12 months, did you ever seriously consider attempting suicide? And these are 11th graders who've said yes, that they have seriously considered attempting suicide. And the blue means that it's a higher percentage of students who said yes. So we have here, I know it's a little bit harder to see, this is by counties. You see a number of counties that we don't have the data for, but you do for most of the counties. The range is, you could see from 15 down here to 31, and a lot of them are right here in the 20%. 20%. So if you have a class of 30 students, it's like 6 students, right, who have seriously considered attempting suicide. So that data was from students throughout California, but we also know adults too. We've experienced mass trauma due to COVID. And so there's been documented increases in mental health issues, substance abuse, and suicidal ideation. So we know that this has been the context that we've been under. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave to talk about cortisol.
So cortisol. Cortisol is a very powerful hormone, and it's the hormone that's produced when we are experiencing stress. It's often called the stress hormone. And some stress and some cortisol is actually it's okay for us. It's actually good for us. It is what can motivate us to study for a test that's coming up or to finish a project. It gives us that extra little adrenaline boost to kind of get through the finish line. But when we have prolonged stress over time, it runs the danger of turning into toxic stress. And toxic stress actually affects our brain growth and development. Next slide. And so we have this slide that adversity doesn't just happen to children or adults too, but it happens inside our brains and our bodies. And this is something that Hanna was just pointing out, those stats that we see more of happening over the past couple of years due to COVID and schools being shut down. Next slide. So if we look at some of those critical brain structures, this slide highlights 3 critical areas. First is the prefrontal cortex that regulates thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. The hippocampus, which stores learning and memory, and the amygdala. The amygdala is the brain's alarm center, and it's what reacts to stress and emotional arousal. The amygdala is also the structure in the brain that alerts us to danger, and it triggers that fight, flight, or freeze response. These structures work together and allow us to regulate attention, emotion, behavior, and all those things that are critical for critical thinking and good decision-making and for memory. Next slide. When we have that unbuffered chronic stress, those toxic levels of cortisol, it actually has the effect of changing our brain. It changes the structure and function for those key areas that are necessary for learning. The prefrontal cortex and hippocampus, they take a back seat to the amygdala, which becomes hyperactive, and it becomes triggered even when we're not in a dangerous situation, right? So the amygdala primarily functions to trigger that fight, flight, freeze, but when we have toxic levels of cortisol, it is constantly in a state of arousal. It becomes difficult and almost impossible to pay attention, to access critical thinking, or to regulate behavior. And students experiencing this toxic level of cortisol are stuck in a fight, flight, freeze mode. Next slide. But fortunately, there is an antidote to that toxic stress and cortisol, and that's the hormone oxytocin. So earlier when we put up the Mentimeter and everybody thought about their favorite class and how they felt, you actually got the small little mini dose of oxytocin. And when we feel a sense of belonging and a sense of safety and strong relationships, oxytocin is released, and that is the buffer necessary to combat cortisol. So when you think about that, really this has huge major implications of how we organize schools, that we need to organize schools as places where there's a sense of belonging, where there's positive, supportive environment, because that is what encourages healthy brain development. And especially important are relationships. Those supportive relationships are really what creates that oxytocin and encourages healthy brain development. Next slide. So we have this slide here, right? Trust is the antidote to stress. And so on the right side, you see those bars. When there's trust, oxytocin levels go up and cortisol levels go down. And so next slide. We'll come back to these slides that Hannah showed before, this idea that the brain is malleable. So really at any stage of development, if we enter a place of strong relationships and trust and sense of belonging, those good connections can be made and we can tap back into the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex areas of our brain for learning. And that's why, next slide, that malleability is both an opportunity and a vulnerability, which has those huge implications for how we organize our schools. Next slide. So again, it's that context matters is kind of the heart of what it comes down to. Next slide. So how does social and emotional learning play into all of this? When we talk about social and emotional learning, we're really talking about two distinct but interrelated areas. One is skills, but then the second is conditions. And what you see here on the screen is known as the Social and Emotional Learning 5, or the SEL 5. And they are the 5 competencies or skills that make up social and emotional learning. In the orange, you see self-awareness and self-management, and they're grouped together as a color because they're about self. There's social awareness and relationship skills, and those are grouped together in the green because they're about relationships or our interactions with others. And then in yellow is responsible decision-making. And those skills can be taught and promoted through direct instruction, as well as how lessons are designed and delivered. But often overlooked when we talk about social and emotional learning is also about promoting healthy conditions or context and environment. And that's really represented by the rings. And this is the environment and context where positive school climate, a sense of belonging, and relationships among students and teachers and families and community exist. Hopefully, it's what encourages that oxytocin that we know is so important to create those healthy conditions for healthy brain growth. Next slide. And then, so here's another way of looking at it, because those 5 SEL competencies, those list out the skills that we want to develop, but really SEL is more than that. And so SEL in this is a 3-legged stool where we see that one of the foundations of SEL is climate and culture. And for me, this is really where social and emotional learning starts and is foundational and connects to this idea of context and environment. I would also make the case that climate and culture is also very much set by the mindsets, habits, and attitudes of the adults in the community. It is much more about standalone lessons where we're delivering explicit instruction. But it's how you go about lesson design and development, right? And that's that that third leg of integration and infusion. When students are engaged in active learning, and when students design cooperative learning groups, when students have agency in what and how they learn, These are all examples of SEL and build on those competencies. And if we think back to those beginning slides, those are some of the same words that we saw in that word cloud, right? It's also, by the way, the skills that are needed in the workplace. And when you do surveys of employers, it's what they are asking, what they are looking for in employees. They often feel, employers feel that they can teach skills of the job in many cases, but what they can't teach are, how do you work together as a group? How do you take on leadership skills and things like that? Next slide. So I love this visual. Really what it comes down to is that the heart and the brain are a partnership. If we want students to be at their best, we have to create those necessary conditions. Think about a student who's feeling unsettled and doesn't have those skills to recognize and manage their emotions. They're much more likely to not have that brain capacity to fully engage in the higher level thinking that's essential for learning, reasoning, and doing. And this is true for all people, regardless of their stress or trauma history, but it's particularly critical to consider for people who've experienced adversity and who've had that toxic levels of cortisol. You can even think about your own response to stress, like a moment when you were upset, or you were scared, or you were fearful. Maybe it was a time when you're experiencing a personal crisis in your life. It's really hard to focus during those moments. And it's those times that we don't make those responsible decisions, when we might say hurtful things or withdraw from the world around us. Next slide. This is a quote by a book called Permission to Feel by Dr. Mark Brackett. By the way, we're going to give you a list of all these resources that have everything we talk about in the presentation at the end. Dr. Brackett is the director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, and he's done a ton of research in the area of connection between emotion and learning. And what brain science is showing us is that our emotional state drives our productivity. When we're calm and we have positive emotions, we're better able to attend, engage, and activate those critical thinking skills and participate in deep thinking, learning, and working. Next slide. Again, like we go back to when our school systems were set up, when schools were first set up, it wasn't for everyone, right? Kids sat in rows, instruction was one-dimensional, no consideration of social and emotional support or relationships. We heard in the video that we used to think that emotions need to be taken out of everything. Oh my goodness, the lights just went off in my room. They're back on. And that the teacher was the giver of knowledge. But what we know now is that we need to redesign our schools. Next slide, Hannah. And we need to design them about relationships, right? And about creating those necessary contexts. Okay, next slide. We're gonna do one more video, and what I'm gonna ask you to do is, if you have a pen or paper, just jot down a phrase or word. If you don't have anything to write with, just as you watch, think about what resonates with you, what from the video resonates with you. Go ahead, Hannah, play away.
Science of Learning and Development Initiative came together to answer a question. What science should we pay attention to in order to understand how learning happens?
Have a good day.
The science of learning and development is really an attempt to synthesize a huge body of knowledge that's accumulated over many, many years from the learning sciences, from psychology and anthropology and brain science, and put all of that together and understand how people, in fact, develop and what else, and how they learn.
There are a few core principles that define all of human development. The first is malleability, the unique property of the brain to change in response to relationships and experiences. Neural tissue is the most susceptible to change of any tissue in the human body. When children are born, their brains are not fully developed. The development of the brain actually continues into young adulthood. It is relationships and experiences that drive the development of the brain. If children have the experience of adversity, they will have uneven development of foundational skills like self-regulation, relationship skills that are prerequisites for more complex skills like perseverance and self-direction. These are the children who are at risk to fall further and further behind. But what's most interesting is that a child can become a productive and engaged learner from any developmental starting point, as long as we intentionally build those skills.
Turn to your table group and discuss this. Come up with a statement.
When we're able to combine social, emotional, affective, and cognitive development together, we are creating many, many more interconnections in the developing brain that enable children to accelerate learning and development.
We got this, guys! We got this!
As educators, we have an extraordinary opportunity to shape the developing brains of children and to create that kind of stimulus that drives the integration of the brain.
Life isn't all about going at it alone. We're up there to support you when you don't necessarily have the skills or tools that you need.
The science of learning and development tells us that school needs to organize for strong relationships.
You look pretty, Miss Ted.
Thank you, baby.
When a strong relationship exists with a teacher, with a mentor, with an advisor, with a school administrator, it actually can reverse the effects of adverse experiences. Children are amazingly resilient if they get that opportunity for attachment, for comfort, and for problem solving with a caring adult. If we walk into a classroom that's really informed by these principles, we'll see kids actively engaged in their learning.
What is this graph telling us?
They will be using critical thinking and problem solving. They will be putting ideas into action.
This one is much longer than the other one you were using.
They will have lots of tools and manipulatives that they can work with to help them understand the ideas. And as they undertake these tasks, they're building both the social and emotional foundation, and they're also building cognitive abilities.
Any volunteers? Go up and do a priority list.
These are all skills that can be taught. These are as important as learning your ABCs and your arithmetic facts.
It's 80, so I have 600.
Nice.
And so it's important to understand that even though somebody says something you might disagree with, everybody's contributing to this shared dialogue in this safe space. Please write down the DLT today. The DLT is I can discuss.
Today, we have a very big task in front of us, but it is a very positive and optimistic task.
Good morning, friends.
Because we now have a knowledge of how children become learners and the opportunity to create an education system that's informed by a knowledge of the developing brain.
So that's collaboration and compassion. Yeah.
All right. Okay.
The science of learning and development.
Oops. Okay, so we're gonna ask you to do another quick survey. So we asked you to consider some words or phrases that you jotted down or noted while you watched the video. So I would love for you to go ahead and take your phone again, scan this QR code, or we're also, thank you, Vanessa, she dropped it in chat for you for a direct link. What words did you jot down as you watched this video? What phrases did you jot down? So go ahead and type that in, and then we'll be able to see your responses. So, okay, I see them popping in. So I'll go ahead and this time I won't count down. We'll just see it as they come. So we see malleable, relationship, positive, integration, not too late for change, relationships matter, self-esteem, cognition, affirmation, environment, interesting, brain, emotion, etc. Distracted? Okay, I would be I'm curious about that one. Awesome, thank you so much for engaging with us. So yes, in a webinar, we try to be really creative and see how we can like engage the audience. So thank you so much. All right, so what I would like to do is kind of shift over to this idea of the school setting. And for those of you who are parents, think about for your child, maybe they are in college, maybe they're younger. I know that we have some educators here. We're speaking to you specifically about this idea of a warm demander. Okay, a warm demander is two-pronged. So this idea of the support and this idea of academic press. So I'll start with a social support. So as you saw in the video, the support is about the relationships, the building of the relationships among students and adults. And they are sense of trust, confidence, psychological safety that allows students to take risks, admit errors, ask for help, and experience failure. I'm going to take it back. As a parent, I think these are really good things to know because that's definitely lessons learned for me. How am I supporting my children with this in terms of supporting them in these ways? The academic press side is the other. So an effective teacher who's a warm demander isn't just all about the warm and fuzzy, yet they are going to push their students so that the learning goals, the content is very clear, expectations are clear, and they're held to high standards, and the students are held accountable. So remember the academic press and social support, there's both. There's a balance of both for an effective teacher who is considered this warm demander. So just want to share with you a couple of data points. So there's a study in Chicago at middle schools, student gains in a 1 year. So how much did they gain? 1.0 is considered a full year. So they did the study based on what was considered low academic press, meaning like low expectations, not held to high standards, low, to high academic press, where students are held to high expectations and standards. So we look at those three, and then within those, we have these low social support, medium social support, high social support. The point that I want you to see is even in a low academic press school, if you have at least a medium support, students can make real gains and not fall behind. And in a high academic press school, a full 2 year in a year can be gained. And this is in math. The next one is in reading. So I'm just kind of going over this real fast because I see that we are getting short on time. And so we just want to close our talk with just to drive it home that emotions and strong relationships are the necessary foundation for learning and for self-actualization, as you saw in the Maslow. So here are a couple of quotes for you. And finally, as we talked about the resources, we have resources that are about self-care, about resilience, about building those SEL skills. It's chock full. We have so many links for you. I think we're putting it in chat, and also we're sending it to you as I believe Vanessa's going to send it to you as a follow-up. We have video, links to the video, articles, the data, as well as the books. Dave mentioned some of those books. So check that out, please. And we just also want to highlight one of those resources. A lot of the content that we have learned is from Turnaround for Children. And there's a free toolbox that is available to you all. It's most useful for educators, but it is free for everyone.
Hannah, I'm just going to say one more thing.
Okay.
I know that we talked a lot tonight around, because Hannah and I both work in public schools in California and in the K-12 system. But I would also say that much of what we said this evening translates to students on a college campus as well. I can think back to my own experience in my university. I went to Columbia University in New York City, and I remember some classes where I felt disengaged, where sometimes honestly I didn't go to all the classes, and other classes where I made sure I was there early, on time, and it was really about the emotion and how I felt in that class. So that's one point, and then the second point when we relate it to college students is there is a ton of stress amongst college students there is the first time away from home, and that's a trauma for many of our kids. And so if we organize our universities and colleges to have support and where they can find strong relationships on campus, they're also going to do better in their college courses in those situations as well. So I know we talked a lot about K-12, but I would say all the concepts, we know that brain development takes place all the way through adulthood as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And I also want to add that as a parent, as I mentioned, I am a parent of a first-year college student. Some of the lessons that I learned is to really allow my child, who is an adult, he's an 18-year-old, I think he's watching me right now, allow my son, my child, to really kind of initiate what he needs from me. Because one of the lessons I learned is I made assumptions about what he needed help with. I would make suggestions, which were really, you should do this. I was shoulding him a lot. Oh, you should do this, do this. And finally, he kind of said, Mom, the more you tell me what to do, it makes me not want to do it. Really, he's an adult. So I think it's really getting my child, my son, to initiate what he needs and then just be there for him. That is kind of a lesson learned for me. Be there for him and say, hey, you tell me what you need and I will help you, but I'm not going to make these assumptions about what you need. So just wanted to share that.
Great, thank you to Hannah and Dave. So I do have some questions for you. Our first question, what are ways to help students who are introverted and perhaps self-isolating? Any suggestions, advice?
Hannah, you want to take that one or you want me to take it?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I think of is it's actually in the tools that we shared with you, is to, and I see in the question too, how do the kids know what they need to? So there's some tools to help students, and this is for everyone. It's for adults, it's for children, about self-awareness. Because for me, the number one thing is like, are you aware? So when you're not feeling well, can you define what that is? And then when you can define what that is, where it comes from. So we have some tools in there. One of them is I can't remember right now at the top of my head. One of them is a HALT SB, which is a tool that we kind of came up with. It's a hungry, angry, lonely, tired, stressed, bored. That's a little acronym, HALT SB. And then there's another one where it's like a check. So that's the first thing that I think of, like help them to kind of self-assess, not like push it on them, but like let them know like, hey, there's some tools. And of course I do know like a lot of colleges do have support structures in place, and see if they know that there are structures in place. So, for example, at the dorms, there are RAs, and there are also, counselors there as well. So encouraging them to kind of check it out, but first kind of know where they are, how they're feeling, what they might need. Dave?
Oh, nothing to add, you covered it.
Great, thank you. Our next question, what role can after-school and community-based activities play in supporting student success? And then what suggestions do you have for organizations looking to partner with schools to provide these activities?
I'll take that one, Hannah. After school or extended learning when those work best is when they're really in partnership and communicating well with the regular day program. And so there's common language that's used across the settings. They're providing opportunities for social interaction as well as academic enrichment. So all of those things kind of work hand in hand. And then if you're an organization that is looking to partner with the schools, I would go and talk with the school principal and see what sort of opportunities there are. I got to move. Apparently this room doesn't like the light. There we go. Talk to the school administration and say, hey, we have this great program. How can we partner with you? And ask, like, how can we create some continuity between your regular school day and after school?
Great, thank you. What are concrete ways teachers can bring this into lessons without losing students who are already jaded about SEL learning being a waste of time?
That's a great question. And hopefully I covered a little bit of that when we talked about SEL being more than just those explicit lessons. We especially hear this when it comes to secondary school. Elementary, normally those kids are much more of a sponge and open to those sort of SEL explicit lessons, but it gets trickier when you move into the middle school and high school levels. As soon as you say this is an SEL lesson, you're going to turn some kids off. But if you have structures of how you do your lesson design, cooperative learning groups, and you can even create rubrics around how did your group work together that gets part of the grade. And again, I'm going to link that to employment skills, right? That's what employers are looking for, people who get along with others and who can do group projects together. So it's that, as well as, you know, SEL, like I said before, is more than just those explicit lessons, but it's that culture and climate that you're creating.
Great, thank you. Next question. So if social support is the crucial element for learning success, how can we help college students when we have less contact with them?
So I think this is also a question that we get for high school as well. I think the message that we need to send as educators, whether you're a high school educator or a college professor, I think the message first is like, hey, you matter to me, I'm available for you. And I know everybody has like office hours, but office hours, that's like an external thing, but really like just kind of welcoming students. I do have a quick story of when a math professor at Mud, when I felt really terribly about how I was doing, I met with him, and it took kind of some courage for me to go in, because I was admitting I was failing. And so that was really hard first step for me to kind of get over myself and go see my professor. But when I did, and then the professor, I thought he would just have this wall, but he was actually like really warm, really listened. I think the presence made a huge difference. I ended up doing really well in that class. So I think making yourself available, welcoming to whatever time that you have. And just, I think a lot of the teachers and professors just kind of don't have a lot of students coming because they are scared. But let them know you are not scary. So I think that's the first step.
Great, thank you. Our next question, how do we address students from different backgrounds who might have different ideas about how to interact with adults? For instance, some groups are more likely to ask a teacher for help when they need it, while others might assume that would be an imposition.
That's a great question. And really what you're talking about is culturally responsive teaching. And we have got resources on that too. I don't know, that could be a whole nother topic for a whole night. But it's, you know, first is the awareness on the teacher's part, right? Of understanding your own culture and sort of what paradigms surround that. But the other piece, so I'll say like being culturally attuned to what different norms are and being able to respond in ways that are inviting to students from all different cultures. And so if there's, you know, if there's somebody who's coming from a culture that's less likely to ask a teacher for help, maybe find other ways. Maybe it's drop a question in a box, or maybe it's have a more social gathering, or you know, maybe bringing in ways to make that student feel like they have a sense of belonging in that class, and that their culture is valued. And I think that's really important.
And if there's another way to kind of let students respond, whether it's like, you know, taking a little survey, for example, say, hey, how confident do you feel in this content? If you don't feel confident, send an email, or just kind of more inviting. So it's not like, okay, you just come and see me if you need help, but more like kind of meet them a little bit closer to where they're at, would be my suggestion.
Great, thank you. So we are almost out of time, so I have one last question for you. Can you please address methods especially effective for special education students with developmental disabilities and advice about emotional impact of learning differences?
That's another great question. I think that where we want to start is recognizing the strengths of those students and celebrating those strengths and modeling that so that all students see that. And again, it's really being intentional around a culture of belonging, and that we all bring something to the community. If we do that, then our students who who do have special education needs and our students who do have developmental disabilities, if they see themselves as a part of the community and they feel like they belong, then they're more likely to also develop those healthy brain connections and learn at their rates. Of course, we have to provide appropriate supports for those students as well, but really it's about including those students. And including is more than just being in the same room, but actually being active participants in the learning of the classroom.
Great, thank you so much. I want to thank Hannah and Dave for joining us today and for sharing your knowledge and insights with us. Thank you to our audience for your questions and for attending this event. We will follow up within the next week with a recorded video and any presentation material. Anything that was mentioned today, you will get those links. Next up on Mud Talks, we have Uncovering the History of Medical Technology with Professor Vivian Hamilton on Thursday, February 23rd at 5 p.m. Pacific time. If you are interested in being a Mud Talks speaker, please contact us at alumni@hmc.edu. Also, all future events can be found on our website, alumni.hmc.edu. Have a great night, everyone, and see you next time.